Just to introduce myself, I'm Lily Horner. I'm the membership coordinator in Liquid. So welcome to our first of hopefully many peer crits. And hopefully someday we can bring that into the real world, but it's good to start on Zoom, and someday we can hopefully see some of you in our gallery. And I'm joined by InLiquid's communication and content coordinator, Liz Rowan. So we're just hoping that this can bring together artists outside of the isolation and quarantine and bring them together and be a valuable benefit to those of you who are members at InLiquid. And for those of you in the audience who aren't members, we are accepting applications on a rolling basis. And you can apply at inliquid.org. Yeah, and so we can jump right into it. We are going to be having three presenters, Robert Zurer, Kathleen Shaver, and Bill Brookover. Each artist is going to speak for about 5 minutes on the piece, and I'm going to be putting up a slideshow so you can all see the piece. And then after that, we're going to open up for a 15-minute discussion of critique and questions for the artist. So first off, we have Robert Zurer. Robert is originally an artist from New York City, and he is now in Philly. So let's bring him up. Where is it? Sorry, here it is.
Okay. Well, a number of people have seen my work on this. And this I only don't know like 3 or 4 people here, maybe 3. But so that's kind of nice, you know, since I never was in Philly before, 2 years ago. Met some wonderful people here. So this is a you know, I think done about 3 months ago before COVID. All my work is done from, the process is I make some marks, small marks, or I use irregularities in the ground that I put down or whatever, and I look and I wait. And then I see something and I'll enforce it, and that changes everything. And then now the question is, where does what the only thing I can really count on is that I'll see something visual that needs to be there or needs not to be there, and that has a certain meaning. And as I keep following that, and it also comes at different speeds. Sometimes a lot of things come quickly, and sometimes it takes days for something to move. Sometimes I have to put the painting away for a couple of weeks before it'll start moving again. Painting is essentially dictating, well, it's not the painting, but whatever's coming through from somewhere is dictating what gets followed, gets pursued. And it's a mystery. I know that the impulse to make a move is coming from that I'm responding to something outside of myself or deep inside of myself that I'm not conscious of in a regular waking consciousness. So it's not like I have an idea ever. It's that I follow along, and at some point this kind of thing comes out. And so what I'm really interested in when I look at art and when I make art is that there's a mystery. I mean, the concept of, you know, of not being completely narrative and not being obvious, and yet the concept of having something that emotionally we can relate to, but that asks to be looked at and asked to be asked to be experienced, so that mystery, you make that motion. And whether or not there's ever an answer, if there was an answer, I think we'd all stop painting, but it's the process of discovery. So of whatever the hell it is. And it's very inspiring to keep having these things coming in. it means there's something out there. And then at the end, I choose one of many ways that I see it, and I put a title on it just to help people to get into the painting. So similar to surrealist process in a way. It's when I started reading about it, a long time. I mean, I've been doing this same kind of process for 50 years. So, and that was long before I learned about anything. So I recently started reading about Jung and the collective unconscious, and symbols as opposed to signs. But living in the question, the feeling of trying to seek, trying to find kind of a spiritual path in a certain way. That's all I got to say, pretty much.
Great, thank you. So now we can open up for discussion.
I have a question. I love listening to you speak about your work, and I've heard it before, but each time, honestly, it appears to me that it's deeper. But did you say that you did this before the virus occurred?
This one, yes. This was probably, I can't really remember, but I think it was probably sometime in maybe February I finished it.
But then did you just recently finish it? Because to me, when I look at it, it has an appearance of what I feel during this shelter.
Well, yeah, I mean, essentially everything that I do is about the human condition.
Yeah.
I mean, it winds up being about our life as humans. 1 foot on the ground, and one, our heads pointing towards the stars, feet on the ground, trapped on the earth, and trying to, knowing there's something that's else.
I have one other question. When do you know that it's finished?
That's one of those questions, isn't it?
Yeah.
Essentially, when it stops talking.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Catherine. Hi.
Hi. Yeah, this looks very COVID present to me.
Well,
being the invasive thing on the top that's coming down to the scary thing, such is life. COVID.
Yeah, but the thing right above the person kneeling is supposed to be very benevolent, like a guardian angel.
Oh.
The thing perhaps coming down above, I mean, that's the way I see it. I didn't know, I didn't put it that way, but it looks like somebody watching, always, the no, never alone is kind of meaning that
Oh, no.
they get close, but they don't touch, but we can be seen, and we're really not alone, even in suffering.
Yeah.
That was how I respond to it after it's done. But it could also be menacing, I suppose. There's a red thing, and maybe both. But that's the idea. It's not supposed to mean one thing. It's supposed to mean itself and its opposite. So yes, it could be an evil thing coming down, and it could, sure, probably is.
Could be both, right?
Right, because we have all in us.
Right.
We do.
For sure.
So I have a couple observations. First, the sense of a transparent curtain being pulled across, or that's how I read it. I find that so compelling. I think, and the way that it creates that sort of triangular shape on the side, I find that very compelling. And also, it seems to me that there are different levels of, I'm going to say reality, for lack of a better word.
That's right.
I read as different levels of experience. So maybe direct tactile, maybe memory, maybe some anxieties hanging in the back of your brain. And that's something that I find very attractive. And I would just say in particular, the sort of long tube shape coming through, which those are shapes that show up in my paintings a lot. But in this painting in particular, it makes me think of the interior of the body. And I think both as I age, but also in the time of coronavirus, this idea that we are so dependent on our physical selves for existence. And there's this whole interior world, our lungs, our intestines, whatever. And if something goes, wrong, that can really screw up our experience,
It spoil your whole day.
Yeah. So that sort of, it could be kind of an intestinal shape going through. That I also find that very, very compelling. It's sort of like the interior of something. So those are my observations.
One comment that I could make about that, based on all the other work that I've done, there seems to always be different portals into different realities. Sometimes it's an opening, sometimes it's a band like that passing from one to the next. So for instance, the figure on the lower right is coming from one into another. But all my paintings all the way through, since I was a young child or young boy or whatever, have always had the coexistence of different ways of living, in a way, different dimensions.
Well, Robert, as soon as you said that, I saw the green oval in the upper left corner as a window through that veil. And I've also been looking at that veil as like, a cosmic, view of galaxies. So we're looking at universes. So scale is huge and tiny at the same time. It's inside our bodies, it's other worlds. And then the triangle on the right is like pulling the curtain behind. So, this whole mystery of like what's outside beyond our universe. Like, so I'm enjoying that. I like that about your work, that there's these different scales and there's some drama going on, but then there's some amazing background world. So many things to think about.
Well, thank you, Bill. Yeah, you're right. It's supposed to be a sky of some sort, or a
universe,
galaxy, or I don't know.
Well, it is pretty remarkable how you got that corona kind of thing going on there.
It didn't exist.
Prescience.
No. A lot of, if you saw the other work, it has a similar kind of bittersweet feel to it.
I think it kind of speaks to how everyone's comparing this to coronavirus, about how from now on we're gonna see things in such a completely different way. And your mindset has your mindset changed at all since starting this painting and everything that's been happening now?
Well, I'm anxious a lot, but my mindset, hopefully my mindset's changing every moment, but if I'm alive, but not in a either or kind of way now. I mean, I knew people were precious before we couldn't see them, so I kind of still no, the answer to the question is no, not really.
I don't see anxiety in this at all. I actually don't find it anxious. I don't find it terrifying. I find it a merging of universes almost. And maybe that's just from my own perception. They used to, when AIDS first came out, by the way, and Fauci was running his studies, I had a number of friends that were involved, and they used art therapy. This was 25 years ago, to incorporate the acceptance of being having AIDS, and they would actually instruct a lot of these individuals that the acceptance of the virus within them allowed them therefore to fight it away, and rather than be anxious and constantly trying to throw it out of their body. And the concept being, I'm not going anywhere, and so if you're going to be here, then you're going to have to live by my rules. So maybe my background in that looks at this in that same way. I don't see.
I think you're right. In the last painting I finished, which was just recently, is titled after a Robert Frost line called "The best way out is through." So, you know, or the way out is the way in, as Dante said. So it's like, yeah, you have to accept whatever it is, and at that point you'll have much more freedom than spending all your energy trying to deny or fight or defend against. So I totally agree with you. But the way I look at this is that's a title of a gospel song. I mean, I'm not Christian, but I do like Christian gospel music. And there's a gospel song called "No, Never Alone," which is a very beautiful song.
Lightning flashing. I like the top, you know, the background where it seems very atmospheric and light filled. It's just an interesting space, but then the object in the middle is kind of flat, so it seems like it's in a different space. Just kind of interesting contrast. And I do see anxiety in it.
The bottom figure, it doesn't look like it's having a great time.
No.
Yeah.
Legs growing out of its head.
Yeah, maybe crown of thorns or something.
Yeah, the more I look at it, the more I do see that green red shape as comforting or coming to that anxious figure on the bottom. You know.
Right. Have anybody ever seen the movie Wings of Desire?
Oh,
you have, Alan, yeah, but it's like that's an amazing Wim Wenders movie, and there's always there are two, Peter Falk and I forgot the name of the other guy, are guardian angels, and they never are seen.
Oh, I see.
They're never seen by the person, but they're always there and they're near.
Gons, I think.
What?
Yeah. Bruno Gons.
Yeah. It's like my favorite movie because I think it's very true.
I saw it so long ago.
Yeah, it's an old movie.
We still have a couple minutes or a minute or two left.
I have a question to use that time up. Yeah. The thing that I'm really struggling with all the time is it's like if I didn't put that, I want people to have an emotional reaction. I mean, that to really get, have some kind of emotional reaction to my paintings. But I also don't want to be that clear so that it becomes a narrative that is self-defining and limiting. But there's a line. So sometimes I wonder even whether I should put a title. But then if I don't put a title, sometimes I've had the experience that people sort of don't know what to say because they don't get it. And
your titles.
What?
I enjoy your titles, so I think you should keep titling them.
Yeah, I'm gonna probably, because I can't not. It's just, I like them too much, but it's just that there's that line, where you want to be ambiguous, you want to ask a question, you want to point to something that someone else has to find to complete the picture.
Mhm.
And the motivation for somebody to actually do that is what I want to provide. And sometimes if it's too, since it comes from inside, it may be too personal. And so that's what I'm struggling with. If anybody has anything to say about that, but otherwise, that's okay if you don't.
Well, even this title, it depends on what someone brings to it, because it could be, no, I never want to be alone.
Yeah.
Or, no, I'm never alone.
Sure.
So,
Good one.
That's good. So that means that kind of leave them as ambiguous as hopefully, yeah. Well, good. Thank you everybody for the crit.
Great. All right, so next is Kathleen Shaver. Kathleen studied at Moore and Paffa, and she's since moved from Philadelphia to the Hudson Valley, the very quarantine-friendly Hudson Valley.
yeah, and let me just pick up on what Robert said about how precious friends are, and really send a shout out of thanks to everybody at InLiquid for doing this, because I think even though we're connecting over Zoom, it's still so important right now to just connect. So thank you. So my work over the last 2 years has really evolved from what I would call an all over field approach to one where there are more separate, distinct areas being defined. So earlier work sort of, some of my more recent paintings before I changed sort of look more like a textured rug or something. Whereas you can see in this, it's almost like a patchwork arrangement. There's shape, there's a little bit of form, there's textured surface, pattern, and I think I'm also using more line and more calligraphic markings. So I would say I've gone from being focused on an all-over energy field to being focused more on the mind's activity on that energy field. And I guess I should also point out that whereas I would paint completely to the edge of the canvas, as you can see here now, and paintings I'm working on now, I'm leaving like a border of canvas, which creates sort of a framing around the image. And I think for me, it makes it a more discrete event rather than an all over ongoing infinite field. It's like an event that happened. I don't plan my paintings as we were discussing earlier. I don't start out with a goal. They pretty much just evolve on their own. And so I was not planning on painting this orange outline on top of the image. That just came to me very instinctually. Even though the painting without that is essentially very flat and on the surface of the canvas, I felt this need to create another dimension. And for me, it acted like the mind saying, okay, you've got this mishigas of thought going on, but I want to have a different thought and just like draw on top of it. And I think there's also maybe you could say a reference to the historic idea of a painting being a window into something. This is sort of like a keyhole to look through. And I see an interest similar to Robert's in, there's a lot of forms that you could say were sort of phallic forms or long, elongated forms, but also containers in my work. And I think it has to do with the very basic way nature sort of operates. There's a stimulator and a receptor. I mean, even the coronavirus, you know, it operates by putting its receptor into a cell. And so I think it's a kind of communication, but it's also a very basic thing in nature. But I think there's also assertion of dominance or power or just movement. And that does seem to come through in the work. So what I would say is, at this point, I'm interested in the space or interplay where there is a raw experience, an unfiltered experience, a very primal sensation. And I guess you could argue the only time you have that is when you're born, or maybe when you're on LSD or something. But the interplay between that and how the mind acts on that sensation and how it begins to shape it and conceptualize it and define it, to name it. And I would say that that's actually where I struggle in the work, because I have to be able to untether my own mind in order to find this sort of raw experience. And of course, you know, you inevitably will I gotta make this a good painting, or I know what a painting is. And so then right away you're conceptualizing and making these decisions based on preconceptions. And it's sort of the struggle to untether my mind to allow this to come forward. That's where I'm really struggling in the process. This painting is probably more successful than some of the other ones that are in process right now. So, you know, it'd be great if I could come up with a process for building it up, but I don't think there is one. So I'll open it up now to questions or comments.
I find it very interesting. It's very interesting to me that I can see it different ways at the same time. Thinking, I mean, it seems very landscapey to me, but you could look at it like looking down into space and also looking into successive things going back in frame, or maybe the bottom half is underground and the top half is above ground. Which I kind of very interesting that, you know, there isn't something definite happening, but there's a lot of possibilities. It's very interesting to look through it, see what's going on.
That it's I really like what you said about there being a sky and an underground. And I should say the title, agriculture, as I said, I live on 27 acres, and part of it is cultivated by a dairy farm. So every day on my walk to my studio, I see either a freshly plowed field or these little corn plants growing. So I think I feel very connected to earth and things growing. But I also like the idea that agriculture implies an intentional cultivation. So it's a way that we shape the earth. You know, we plow it and we plant particular seeds. And so you have the whole of wild nature, but we're shaping it and nurturing it. And that came to me too. But I didn't really think about there being sky and an underground. So that's very interesting.
How do you try to untether yourself when you're working? Your mind?
I play tricks with myself. I'll put the canvas on the easel and I'll turn around and paint the one on the wall, that's leaning on the wall. Or I'll start out cleaning the studio and then just wind up painting. I try to, I suppose it's probably similar to what people do when they're trying to meditate, is to go to a different place. And I think, you know, it can be scary because you're like, oh my gosh, you know, I may wind up with a big mud bath here. It's, yeah, I play different games like that, almost like painting over my shoulder. I can't remember the artist's name, but I read an article about an artist who would put a chair or a table in front of himself and have to like paint around that. So, and I use spatulas and rollers and misshapen brushes that take away some of my control and allow for more accidental surprises. So I may have an intentional stroke, but what happens may surprise me somewhat because the tools are.
Those are all good ways. You ever try rotating the canvas and doing it and then rotating it and rotating it? I do it, you know.
I always rotate them, yes. And I also put it against the wall and don't look at it for a couple days.
All those things are, yeah, good idea. And the other thing with regard to that, I mean, at the risk of saying something everybody knows, that Guston story about people comes into the studio and there are all these people in the room. You know that one? It's actually, he quotes John Cage. Yeah, and then they start to leave, and then finally he leaves, and then he can start to paint once nobody.
Yeah, I love that quote. And also another thing Guston said, and hopefully I won't mix this up too much, but he said something essentially like the problem is when the hand won't allow the mind to express itself, something like that. And for me, I think it's, I want to get the mind out of there. I'm interested in what the mind's doing, but I kind of want to unpack it a little bit, you know, take it apart a little, open it up. But I love that quote of Guston's.
Yeah, I think it is John Cage. I think he was quoting John Cage, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Kathy, I like what you said about wild nature and agriculture being very definite in terms of intentionally cultivating little beets. And that's what I see, little plots and different areas. And yet the nature is still wild and crazy all over the place. And I like that combination a whole lot. You know, it's both. It's wild and chaotic and ordered and beautiful. The colors are beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Well, you know what? Those are probably qualities that attracted me to your work.
Oh, goodness.
So,
really?
I mean, I've always, whenever I've taken a plane flight, when you look down and you see all how the earth is plowed and then there's a forest here. I don't know why. I just love that.
I do too, yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. But this is close to the earth. I feel like I'm in your garden, underground, and a little mole and up and around and all over the place. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, that's good. Thank you.
Kathy, this is Annie.
Hi, Annie.
Hi, Kathy.
I'm throwing Annie a kiss because Annie's husband performed my marriage with my husband, so. But also because we're good friends.
Yes. So, you know, I hear everybody's comments, but I have to say that what attracts me most, interestingly, is that figure on the left. And I see it as a cross. I see it as a sword. I see it as a weapon. And I see it as phallic in a way too. And so for me, that has the most meaning in this painting.
Yeah, you know something, I will say, I have a sculpture, there's a sculpture I did where the form is similar, and it is very evocative of a crucifixion. So I think in my work, I am very interested in art history and allowing certain symbolisms or mythologies or religious icons to sort of come forward, because I think they're anchors for us in a way. That sort of cross form that seems somewhat human, but someone like a piece of dead wood or something. I'm really attracted to that for some reason. And probably the more self-conscious part of me will be like, oh my gosh, that's ugly, and who would be interested in that? But I'm trying to, as I said, untether the mind, like just let it come out. But thank you for that observation.
Well, it seems like a digging tool too.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I've been doing a lot of digging. I mean, I will admit that for a while I was just frustrated, like, why are all these semi-phallic symbols always coming out in my work? And then I realized, well, you know, that's not the only thing going on here. And that's when I started really thinking about the idea of a stimulator and a receptor, that it's all over nature. And it's also how we kind of communicate. So I decided, okay, I'm just gonna let go of that and, you know, let it come out in the painting, however it might. But I'm not Christian, but the crucifixion is, I think, just a very powerful, very evocative image, as is, I think, this idea of vertical and horizontal. You know, we live on both those dimensions, you know, always seeking sort of the higher, and yet we cling to the earth because that's how we live. We live from the earth. So I think that dimensional aspect is important to me too.
Well, also that bottom left corner feels very womb-like to me.
Yeah, I think that both the phallic forms and womb-like or apertures are present in the work. So, so that's interesting that you read it that way.
Well, and, you know, and it fits with the idea of agriculture and, you know, the earth and things growing and et cetera, et cetera.
Well, thank you for that observation.
You're welcome.
I came late, so I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but I love the lines. The lines are so interesting because they're thick and thin and they go in and out, and I think that the black lines are wonderful.
Well, thank you. I was reading a book about de Kooning, and as some of you may know, de Kooning trained in commercial art and did a lot of sign painting. And I read that he used the sign painter's brush in his work. So it's a brush where you can go from a tiny thin line to a bigger, fatter line, just change. So I immediately had to go order a bunch of sign painter brushes to try that out. And I don't, so that's, and that's when I began to introduce more of the idea of this, of that calligraphic line, which is a little bit for me, both the mind thinking, but also the way in which we materialize our thoughts, whether it's by writing or sketching or just how we mark things. That interests me a lot.
I read it very similar to Annie in that the first object that seemed to ground me in the space was the figure from the left, from the bottom to the top, and I saw it as a person, arms outstretched, looking into the distance at a field or a pagoda or whatever is out there, saying, yes, someday all this will be yours. It's like, surveying the domain, and it gives space to the painting, because I see it as closest, except for the keyhole, which is in front. But I think what you said about horizontal and vertical is exactly what I say when I talk about the human condition, which is that we're both. And I think this is a really fascinating painting, and I really respond to it in a lot of different ways.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that, because I wish I could say everything I was working on was successful. So thank you very much.
Does anybody have any final thoughts about before?
Taking to the salad, I see broccoli and maybe
No asparagus. I planted an asparagus garden this year.
Oh, I see.
That takes a couple of years.
Right.
Well, now that we've been talking so long, and I think it's one thing I love about these crits is a chance to really just sit and look at a work, plus listening to everybody's comments. But now I'm seeing it, but it's like a cubist work where you're seeing it vertical, but you're also looking straight down at it. Like you're like flying over a landscape, but you're also standing, looking at a vista. It's above and below, like a section through the earth. There's so many ways that it's working all at once that that's really wonderful. Thanks, but I'm not sure I would have seen it if I hadn't sat here, looking at it a while. You have to really sit with a work of art to really get into it. So, too much of our time is like, 5 seconds, move on.
Right.
One thing I do to short circuit my mind is listen to podcasts with lots of words, and just listen to the words while my hand is moving. Music, of course, does the opposite, but it infiltrates into my hand. But the words keep my mind busy, and so I don't know if you've tried that to short circuit your mind, but I do that.
Well, my two go-tos are Bob Dylan, because his words are just so untethered, kind of. And I also love to listen to opera, because I have no idea what they're singing about, but there's something there.
The thing about music is it really is so emotional, especially the two things you said, mostly Bob Dylan. It's like part of my bloodstream. So if I listen to Bob Dylan, I would never get any painting done, because I couldn't. It would get so far, it would take me up so much. So the idea is to keep my mind gone on something,
right?
Completely intellectual.
That's interesting. Wow.
Yeah, because the emotion, if I listen to music, it's beautiful. We had a studio visit with a crit group that I was in New York with Kathy Bradford. And Kathy Bradford, someone asked, do you listen to music? I don't know if you know Kathy Bradford, but yeah, she's an amazing painter and really successful now, finally.
Yeah.
And so she said, no, I can't listen to music, because then everything I paint would be fantastic. And I fully understand what she meant. So I listen to words. I can't listen to music that much, because if I want to keep my mind out of it. So I'm just a suggestion, because I know it's a problem. It's my problem as well.
That too, I listen to talk when I'm painting. If I'm writing something, I can listen to music.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, that is
lately the talk is so disturbing. I have trouble listening to.
Well, you got to listen to something else. That's all. I don't listen to that right now, because it's too painful. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so now, lastly, we're gonna move on to Bill. Bill Brookover. Bill's from West Texas.
Yes.
And he's studied at Rice in Columbia and many other places in Nat and Fleischer Art Memorial, where he currently teaches. So, Bill.
So I want to echo what Robert and he said about thank you so much to InLiquid for doing this. It's one of the odd things about this moment that many of us are privileged to be very comfortable and working in our studios when there's so much pain in the world. And at the same time, we're separated, but then we can talk to people from all over the place doing this. And it's not real human interaction, but it's way better than nothing. So thank you for doing this. So unlike the previous two artists, I am not a painter. I am a printmaker. And my background before printmaking was architecture and history, historic preservation. But my architecture background, I think, really shows the most in what I work on. So I really feel like geometry is something I go back to as a generator of form. And over the last 5 or 6 years, I've been vacillating between things extremely ordered and calm and, you know, versus things that are less ordered and calm. And I'm always balancing order and chaos in my work. So this is actually something I did about a year ago. It's part of a body of work I did. I had a show at Da Vinci Art Alliance called Dissonance. And the idea, so it started with an idea that, you know, we live in this time, even before the pandemic, you know, we're in a lot of chaos. And looking back at my life, you know, I was in college in the late 60s, early 70s. There's been a lot of chaos for the last 50 years, like assassinations and changes and technology and global economy and all kinds of things. So the world is just crazy. And then the last 3.5 years, even more so, even before the pandemic. So I was trying to find a way to create visual expressions of these chaotic moments where sometimes things briefly come into focus and are calm and ordered, but then things are moving away. So I did about 20 screen prints. So the way I work, I don't usually know what it's exactly going to look like when I start. I usually think about ideas and then select a set of images that I put onto screens that are all the same size so I can layer images over and over again. And then I do a lot of what we call proofing in printmaking, where that's where the experimenting is, of trying different patterns and images on top of each other, different colorways, looking for contrast, looking for images that seem to work. So it's like, it's that, you know, when do you know it's done? Oh, I don't know. You just, you know, either there's no room for anything else, or, you know, you've hit a moment like, okay. And then the printing is kind of memorializing that set of actions. So it's like a performance kind of thing. So this one began, it's like 3 layers. There's a background gray layer where it's supposed to be a uniform flat gray, but there's actually imperfections, which then worked to my benefit, because then that became like sort of a gray sky. The triangles there is an order in that each one is in its own little rectangular cell, and there's only 2 kinds of triangles. There's pyramids and sort of pennant shapes, and they're either going up or down or left or right. But then within each row, there's a randomization of patterns. So one of the tricks I do to create things that are not conscious is using chance or chaos things. And so there's a randomized order of the triangles. And then if you look at them closely, the top 2 rows are big, and the bottom 2 rows are big, and then the middle 4 are half that size, but also everything is always different in every row. And then the yellow layer is really, I had a piece of plywood and I was looking at the grain in the plywood, and I kind of carved away all the softer grain and left all the harder grain, and then did some prints on that, and then played with them in Photoshop to kind of increase the contrast, and then burned that onto a screen. And then this is actually the wood grain in this yellow layer printed, you know, upside, you know, top at the top, and then flipping the screen around and printing it another way. So there's a lot of experimentation in trying to figure out what is going to work from these images. And I don't know, while this body work began with this thought of this chaos dissonance thing, I don't know, I'm not really thinking, well, this one is going to be the yellow patterns floating in the gray sky. That just kind of emerges from the work. And so to Robert's point about naming, typically I name things like layered triangles, number 3, gray and yellow. So in this body of work, I decided I would try to use titles. I feel like that doesn't allow people a way in. I mean, it's a straightforward description of layers and shapes and colors, but it doesn't tell people the ideas behind it. So in this body of work, I decided to choose titles that were all 2 words, that every title had a positive aspect and a negative aspect. So this one is called Peaceful Transgression. So,
I like it.
I'd love to hear what people have to say.
Well, I'll just say what I'm drawn to immediately is the texture of the wood on top. It gives a different, a very rich layer of dimensions, you know, to it, because I know it's wood texture. And I guess it won't surprise you if I say, you know, I like then the contrast between, which seems to be almost a very intellectual human thing of making these little triangles, but then the pattern is from wood, which is, you know, completely natural. And I like the interface of that.
Right, I agree. I think the triangles are like order, and you're going to get that same thing every time. And I didn't see the grain so much on the yellow part. It was more like the chaos. I thought you just put it on some kind of way so that it's, every time you did it, it would be different. That's how I read it when I saw it. But I like the combination, which was like that dissonance I remember from the show. That this was like a dissonant piece because it had some that are one way and some that are the other.
So I was, you know, working with the idea that the geometry is, you know, a man-made thing. I don't know whether we invented geometry or we discovered geometry, but it's like agriculture. It's one of those things that is a result of, you know, our minds working on the world and making things. But it is very ordered and straight lined as opposed to the wood grain, which is very flowy and it's part of nature. But then a piece of plywood is an incredibly manipulated thing because it's thin veneers of wood shaved out of a tree and then glued together. And it's, you know, so it's we're no longer creatures of wild nature. We've created the world that we live in.
Yeah. Do you ever use like another layer, like to put another color on it too, or do you just use 2? Oh, you have 3.
Well, this one has 3.
I thought it was gray paper. Yeah.
This one has 3 because it's a background flat of gray. That's part of the experimenting and is seeing, you know, like how few layers do I need to make something that I think works as a statement, whatever that means. And some of the pieces in this show had like 5 or 6 layers. I was having to work really fast because the show was in December and I had thought I would be working all summer long, but I had a lot of health problems in June and July, and so I really didn't get in the studio till August, and so I had to really barrel through, which is actually very helpful for making the conscious brain shut up, because like I've got a deadline. I don't have time to talk to you. These are the tools, these are the screens I have, that's ink I'm using, boom, let's go. So that's very helpful. But so sometimes they got more complicated, but I found I was struggling with if I had too many layers and I hadn't planned the contrast of color well enough, then it just became muddy and mushy and so it was sort of like I had these screens, I started printing them to see what they would do. The way I work is I've got this image as a printed on Mylar, and I use at the same size as the print, and then I burn that onto the screen. But then I can use the Mylar to layer over once I've done a print with another pattern to kind of see what's going to happen when the wood grain interacts with triangle, you know, that kind of testing before I then do some color. And then once I feel like, oh, that sequence of things seems to work okay, then I would print one. Normally I would print like 5, so I would have a small edition, but I didn't have time. So hoping to go back and make a small edition of these. So right now these are all, even though they're printmaking, they're all one of a kind. But they can be reproduced.
Nice.
I was sort of seeing like the triangles as organisms in the way that organisms can like be bouncing off each other in multiple directions, and sort of like the triangles were reminiscent to me of things moving from one place to another in a sort of chaotic way, and that the yellow to me was actually reading as like a green and almost an earth. So it's sort of like becoming this statement about, and this is where I thought the title was Peaceful Transgression was coming from, but like it was about, you know, how things are moving around but unified through the environment. And I don't know if that's what you were thinking, but that's how I was reading it.
It doesn't matter what I was thinking, it's what you see. Well, so another aspect of the triangles is that they can be like a crystalline structure, like minerals, but maybe they're spaceships flying, but then they're kind of locked into their position, but maybe they're moving, you know. And I do think in terms of overall fields. So every time I do something like this, I'm also imagining that we're only seeing like a cropped piece of it, and there's more of it going out in different directions.
Yes, I definitely got that.
You could see it as like, I mean, riffing off what Ellen just said about, you could see it as like a regatta, each sail inside of a wave in the ocean going, you know, like a bunch of sailboats riding in each black declivity of the waves or something.
Right. Or maybe the Starfleet just came out of hyperspace.
Or maybe, yeah.
Well, I saw the triangles as birds flying in the sky, and the yellow-green to me is reminiscent of the sky preceding a tornado. Skies I saw in Minnesota, and with the birds taking flight to escape the pending danger.
Interesting.
Oh, that's interesting, because I read that it is sort of electric yellow, and I thought of it as sort of almost like static electricity moving through, which I found to be sort of interesting in conjunction with the title, because, you know, it could be like a disruptor, like, you know, but then you've titled it Peaceful Transgression. So it's a bit of a conundrum for me, and I like that.
Well, I have to say, as people are talking, I've gone in a completely different direction.
Good.
That it reminds me of the Exodus, Passover Haggadah.
Oh, wow.
And it just keeps, and that just keeps going, through my head and connecting to it in that way. And, people going through the desert and all that stuff.
Well, that's so interesting because I think it's because of the title Peaceful. One of my first associations was of the demonstrations, and like everyone like on a plaza or somewhere kind of arranged and interacting and moving.
Maybe that's the tear gas flowing through.
Yeah, I don't know. But I can definitely see the allusion to an exodus. Absolutely.
Well, I love that.
Alan, were you going to say something before? I thought maybe I didn't want to.
Well, I was just saying, there's pyramids or in Egypt too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and that goes back to, how did we start making equilateral triangles? How did we figure out to orient the pyramids, to the cardinal directions, which goes back to what Robert was saying about, our vertical and horizontal. We are vertical beings on a horizontal plane. If you watch a baby learning to walk, they can't wait to be vertical and moving, and that's kind of what Kathy was showing in her work about the force of agriculture growing. It's like, there's a certain imperative of living things that we have to do certain things. And so, I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with that.
So what makes something work, do you think?
Oh, man.
You kept talking about it, and you look at it, and you see if it works. And everybody says that. I say it. I have no idea what it means.
I think that's the hardest thing to articulate. It's like, the Supreme Court justice who says, I know porn when I see it, It's done when and also part of the way I work, because I don't work that fast. And in this project, I had like 8 screens and maybe 10 different colors of ink I was working with. And I would do a lot of proofing. And so it would take me 3 or 4, maybe a week to get through one set of permutations. And so when I'm not in the studio is when or I'm sleeping, or I'm in the shower, or brushing my teeth, doing something rote, but not really thinking. That's when another idea would come, or I would think, oh, no, that was too far. Or no, what if I did this? That's when other ways of doing it,
amazing, isn't it?
I allow them to come into consciousness, and then I go try it. But then I've got to put it on the wall and live with it for a while. And I don't know.
I call that the shower oracle.
Yes.
Yeah. It's amazing that everybody knows about that.
But then in my case, it was like they have to be in frames or ready to pin to the wall and delivered to the gallery by X day. So I guess it's done.
It's an unfair question, I think.
Well,
I think that's something we all struggle with. And when I started making prints, I would have somewhat of a better, clearer notion of what I was doing. I want to do this thing. I want it to look like X. And then I would finish it and think, this is terrible. And then my instructors would say, don't tear it up, put it in the drawer, go do another project. And then you go look at it 6 months later, like, oh, not so bad. So you have to be kind to yourself and give it time to gestate. And then maybe you look at it in 6 months and say, now I know what it needs. It needs, like one thing or something. I don't know. How did Kathy know to put the orange keyhole?
Yeah, it was, yeah. And it's like, okay, I'm going to paint this orange thing on there. And I was just going to say, I've had the experience many times where I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a monster. It's a mess. And I put it against the wall and I'm so discouraged. And like you say, open the drawer. You come back 2 weeks and you're like, oh wow, there's something there. you know, and that's the mind again, like imposing. It's
but I also think it's the mind and the eye, and it's not only doing your own work and looking at it closely, but looking at lots of other work and figuring out, you know, we were talking before the call, you know, before everybody joined us about who were our influences. I think it's looking at lots of work and thinking hard about, what if I tried to do what Matisse did? What if I tried to do what Guston did? And maybe you try that a little bit, and then something fits or it doesn't, and then you leave it, and then 10 years later, something emerges that you didn't think consciously about that, but it builds into your whole fund of experience that then comes out. I don't know.
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest influences on me recently, to go back to Dylan, was I watched a documentary, and I realized how, you know, in many respects when he was starting out, he was out there on his own. I mean, people thought his stuff was horrible.
Yeah.
And, but he knew what he was after, you know, and that inspired me to think, you know, you got to stop judging this. You have to trust what it is in there you're after and go for it.
Well, and the other inspiration is just staying out on the road. Just keep working. Write another song, sing it again, write a different song.
Yeah, he just has
sing
a
it
brand
the way
new
nobody
album.
wants to hear it anymore. But, you know, like, I'm not going to sing it the way it was on the record. I'm going to sing it this way.
Yeah, he has a brand new record out right now.
Yes,
yeah,
he does.
But
that was very inspirational to me. Yeah.
Does anyone have any final thoughts before we wrap up? No. Okay. Well, what?
This was great. Thanks for doing it.
Yeah, thank you
Yes.
all for
Thank you, InLiquid,
and coming or staying in, but logging in to the Zoom. And I think this was a good start to what's hopefully going to be a mainstay in our programming. And like I said in the beginning, hopefully we'll be able to do this in person in the gallery, fingers crossed soon. And you guys can just take a look and keep your eye on our other programming that's going to be coming out in our newsletter. And if you're not signed up for our newsletter, you can do that on inliquid.org. And yeah, so thank you all for coming again, and stay safe.